One of the most important and least understood sources of energy in the world today is nuclear power. Nuclear power has an energy density tens of millions of times greater than fossil fuels and has one of the most impressive safety records of any source of energy. Yet, for decades, controversy has surrounded it and has hindered its adoption. A new appreciation of the benefits of nuclear power, however, might be changing that. Learn more about nuclear power and how it works on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by Fiji Water. You've probably heard of Fiji Water and have seen it in stores. Well, Fiji Water really is from the islands of Fiji. Drop by drop, Fiji Water is filtered through volcanic rock, 1,600 miles away from the nearest continent and all its pollution, protected and preserved naturally from external elements. In this process, it collects a unique profile of electrolytes and minerals, resulting in more than double the electrolytes as the other top two premium bottled water brands, giving Fiji Water its smooth taste. Fiji Water's electrolytes are 100% natural, and this water even has a perfectly balanced pH of 7.7. I've recently been trying to reduce my consumption of diet soda, and I found Fiji Water to be a great alternative. Visit your local retailer to pick up some Fiji Water today for your next backyard party, beach day, hike, or even your home office. Fiji Water is Earth's finest water. This episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. Break down genealogy brick walls with a subscription to the largest online newspaper archive. Did you know that newspapers.com has over 1 billion pages of digitized newspapers going back to the year 1690? Their growing collection includes papers from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and more. Discover birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, and everyday stories about your ancestors in seconds. Newspapers.com can help you fill in the gaps between vital records and reveal details about your ancestors' lives that you can't find anywhere else. Their easy-to-use search feature will let you filter your results by date, location, specific paper, and more. When you find something interesting, newspapers.com makes it a snap to share it with your family and friends, and you can even save it directly to your ancestry tree. Come explore 1 billion pages and make infinite discoveries today on newspapers.com. Use promo code EverythingEverywhere for a 20% discount on your subscription. This episode has been a long time in the making. I've previously done episodes on wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, oil, and coal, and now it's time for nuclear to take its turn. This episode will actually be a springboard for several future episodes as there's so many related topics surrounding the technology and the history of nuclear power. Nuclear power, as it exists today, involves getting energy from nuclear fission, or the splitting of atomic nuclei, almost always from the element uranium or plutonium. There are several attributes of nuclear power that have made it so attractive. For starters, there is an enormous amount of energy that can be unleashed from the splitting of atoms. For example, 1 kilogram of coal yields about 24 megajoules of energy when burned. 1 kilogram of oil yields about 42 megajoules of energy. And per kilogram, natural gas holds about 55 megajoules. By comparison, a kilogram of uranium-235, the fissile isotope of uranium, has 82 million megajoules if it's fully consumed. That is over 1 million times more energy dense than natural gas. And unlike other fossil fuels, it doesn't have any emissions. Compared to renewable energy sources like wind and solar, nuclear can provide a base load of power 24/7, and it isn't dependent upon the weather. It also takes up much less space. A 1 gigawatt nuclear plant takes up about 1.3 square miles based on current existing plants. Solar power takes up approximately 10 to 20 times the land to produce the same amount of electricity, and wind can take as much as 100 times as much land. Nuclear is also highly safe. Coal has approximately 25 deaths per terawatt of electricity produced. Oil has 18 deaths per terawatt, natural gas has 3 deaths per terawatt, and hydropower has 1.3 deaths per terawatt. Wind has 0.04 deaths per terawatt, Nuclear has 0.03 deaths, and solar has 0.02 deaths. Basically, nuclear power is about as safe as wind and solar. Despite everything that nuclear power has going for it, the percentage of electricity produced by nuclear power has dropped over the years. Today, the percentage of electricity produced by nuclear is about 10% worldwide, which is down from approximately 17% in the mid-1990s. The history of nuclear power begins with the discovery of nuclear fission in 1938, when German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann found that bombarding uranium with neutrons caused it to split into smaller nuclei, releasing enormous amounts of energy. This breakthrough, explained theoretically by Lisa Mittner and Otto Frisch, came just before the start of the Second World War. Unfortunately, given its timing just before the war, the first manifestation of nuclear fission was with weapons, not power generation. And this association with destructive weapons gave nuclear power a negative connotation with many people. In fact, many people still believe that a nuclear reactor can explode like an atomic bomb, which is literally impossible. A bomb requires over 90% fissile material, like U-235 or plutonium-239. A reactor, however, usually will only have between 3 to 5% fissile material. After the war, scientists turned towards peaceful applications of nuclear energy. In 1951, the experimental breeder reactor 1 in Idaho became the first reactor to generate usable electricity, producing enough power to light a few light bulbs. A few years later, in 1954, the Obninsk nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union became the first nuclear power station to supply electricity to a grid. Britain soon followed with its Calder Hall station in 1956, marking the beginning of commercial nuclear power. These very early reactors are known as first-generation reactors. They were essentially experimental designs meant to demonstrate that nuclear energy could be used for electricity generation. Examples include the Shippingport Atomic Power Station in the United States and the Magnox reactors in the United Kingdom. They had relatively low efficiency, limited safety systems, and were not intended for long-term commercial use. The 1970s saw the rise of what are known as second-generation reactors. They were designed with commercial power production in mind and emphasized standardization. Common types included pressure water reactors, boiling water reactors, CANDU reactors, and Soviet RBMK reactors. Safety features were improved, but primarily relied on active systems such as pumps, valves, and operator actions. These plants typically had a lifespan of 30 to 40 years, though many have been extended to 60 years with upgrades. Most reactors still operating in the world today belong to this generation of nuclear reactor. The 1970s marked the largest construction boom in nuclear reactors in history. However, as nuclear power plants proliferated, so too did public concern over safety, waste disposal, and the risks of radiation exposure. Several high-profile incidents fueled these anxieties. In 1966, the partial meltdown of the Fermi 1 breeder reactor near Detroit, although contained, brought home the possibility of nuclear accidents on American soil. At the same time, the environmental movement was gaining strength, and books like Ralph Nader's 1971 The Menace of Atomic Energy and growing activism by anti-nuclear groups kept safety issues in the public eye. The result was a wave of new regulatory scrutiny in the 1970s. In the United States, the Atomic Energy Commission was dissolved in 1974, and its responsibilities were divided between two new agencies: the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which focused solely on safety and licensing, and the Energy Research and Development Administration, which later became part of the Department of Energy. This resulted in an explosion in regulations, which had a corresponding effect on cost and construction time for new reactors. The cumulative effect of all these regulations was dramatic. In the early 1970s, a nuclear plant could move from application to construction in as little as 3 to 4 years. By the end of the decade, the licensing process alone could take that long, while the construction itself stretched into the 10 to 12-year range. Regulatory requirements proliferated so quickly that plants approved under one set of standards often found themselves required to retrofit or redesign midway through construction, driving up costs and causing lengthy delays. Between 1970 and 1974, utilities placed orders for over 200 reactors. But by the late 1970s, nearly half of those projects were canceled, and almost none were completed on the original schedule or budget. The first major blow to the public perception of nuclear power took place in 1979. An accident occurred on March 28, 1979, at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It began with a malfunction in the secondary cooling system that triggered the shutdown of the reactor. A relief valve in the primary cooling system stuck open, allowing coolant water to escape, but operators were unaware of the valve's stuck position. Believing that the system was overfilled with water, they manually reduced the flow of emergency cooling, which made the problem even worse. What made the accident even bigger in the eyes of the public was that just 12 days earlier, a movie called The China Syndrome was released, which was about an accident at a nuclear reactor. Oddly enough, while 3 Mile Island is often called a disaster, no one was killed and nobody was actually even injured. In 1986, the world's worst nuclear accident took place at the Chernobyl reactor in the Soviet Union. This is going to be the subject of a future episode, but what happened in Chernobyl was indeed bad, primarily due to an extremely poor Soviet reactor design which didn't exist anywhere else in the world. Initial estimates that were reported in the news when the event happened placed the death toll in the thousands. However, subsequent research by the World Health Organization and the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation found that the actual impact of the disaster was far less than the original estimates. Nonetheless, the damage to public perception was done. Nuclear projects were halted or cut back significantly all over the world. Only a few places, such as France, continued to invest in nuclear power. Currently, France gets about 70% of its electricity from nuclear, the highest percentage in the world. As public perception was turning against nuclear power, advancements in technology and reactor design continued. Third-generation reactors were developed. They featured passive safety systems that can shut down or cool the reactor without human intervention or external power, enhanced fuel technology, and designs meant for 60-plus year lifespans. With passive safety systems, something like 3 Mile Island couldn't happen. Another thing that most people don't realize about nuclear power is that not all reactors are the same. There are different types of reactors that work very differently. There are fast and slow reactors, which regulate the speed of neutrons. There are high pressure and high temperature reactors that use different materials to transfer heat. And there are different designs and even different fuels that can be used. Just like with airplanes, advancements in technology have improved safety and efficiency over time. There's a lot to be said about different reactor designs, which I'll leave for a future episode, because understanding how each of them works does require more time. I'll close by discussing something that many of you are probably wondering about: nuclear waste. Nuclear waste is often made out to be a major problem, yet it really isn't. Unlike fossil fuels, which spray their waste into the environment, nuclear reactors can keep everything in one place. It's easy to track, store, and contain. To be sure, when material comes out of a reactor, it is dangerous. Very dangerous. Even short-term exposure to it could kill you. However, if you remember back to my episode on radiation, the more radioactive something is, the shorter its half-life. Waste is initially stored in water for a decade because water is particularly good at absorbing radiation. After 10 years, the radioactivity of the waste is just 1% of what it was when it came out of the reactor. From there, it can be stored in what's called dry casks, which are heavy, massive containers where it can naturally continue to cool down. Within several hundred years, the radiation levels would be down to a level where, while you wouldn't want to have any prolonged exposure, it wouldn't be lethal. Finland has announced that they will be opening up the world's first deep geologic repository for waste in 2026. Waste will be safely stored deep beneath the surface where it can sit for up to 100,000 years. However, there doesn't have to be any nuclear waste, as almost all of it can be recycled. That's right. The entire nuclear waste problem can be solved because almost everything that comes out of a reactor is still usable for fuel. It could either be separated or used for fuel in what are known as breeder reactors. Breeder reactors are special reactors that can turn fertile material like uranium-238 into fissile material like plutonium-239. This allows the 99.3% of naturally occurring uranium-238 to be used as fuel rather than the much rarer uranium-235, which only makes up 0.7% of all natural uranium. When early nuclear researchers were designing reactors, they just assumed that everybody would be using breeder reactors in the future because they made so much sense. But that never happened. Not only can breeder reactors use nuclear waste as fuel, but they can also use fuel more efficiently, ensuring that the uranium reserves that we have could potentially last for thousands of years. Nuclear power has started to have a renaissance. More people are realizing that nuclear checks off so many important boxes. It provides an enormous amount of baseload energy. It is not intermittent. It doesn't have any emissions. New designs have solved most of the safety issues. Some proposed reactors can even be built at a cheaper cost, and the issue of waste is a very solvable problem. Right now, the only country that is building reactors en masse is China. While many countries are reconsidering nuclear power, it will take a lot of political and economic willpower to restart construction projects. Nuclear power was originally promised to be the power source of the 20th century. Hopefully, with a renewed commitment, it could finally fulfill its promise and become the power source of the 21st century. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Austin Oetken and Cameron Kieffer. My big thanks go to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon. Your support helps make this podcast possible. And I also want to remind everyone about the community groups on Facebook and Discord. That's where everything happens that's outside the podcast, and links to those are available in the show notes. As always, if you leave a review on any major podcast app or in the above community groups, you too can have it read on the show.